Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the world of silk slippers and gold-plated chamber pots because you're about to become the 1% of the past, a Victorian millionaire. Tonight, you're going to experience a world where your wealth is measured in top hats, your home needs its own postal code, and your daily worries include, did your butler pour the tea at the right angle? So before you settle in, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Now, go ahead, dim the lights, get under your hopefully clean sheets, and put on a fan for that soft white noise. But let's pause for a second. Did you really need a servant just to warm your socks before you put them on? Was your fortune built on coal, canals, or just good old-fashioned marrying your cousin? Was your dog fed better meals than half the city of London? And could your dinner party collapse into chaos if the jelly didn't wobble at the correct angle? Congratulations. You've just woken up in 1875, and you're rich enough to afford a seat in Parliament, or at least a spectacularly uncomfortable velvet chair. Good luck. You stir beneath 5 layers of monogrammed blankets in a bed large enough to fit a cricket team. Sunlight leaks in through velvet curtains as a housemaid quietly tiptoes across acres of Turkish carpet to bring you a tepid glass of water. And, for some reason, a newspaper printed with your own stock prices. Your day hasn't started, but 3 people are already apologizing for it. Your eyes flutter open not to the sound of an alarm clock, but to the gentle patter of slippers and the distant, mournful groan of a boiler the size of a small train. There is perhaps a faint whiff of lavender in the air, or possibly mothballs and expensive regret. The sheets beneath you are so crisp you're slightly afraid of paper cuts, and the mattress has more springs than the average Victorian child's toy collection. This, apparently, is luxury. The ceiling above is painted with fluffy cherubs, all of whom are staring at you in judgment for still being in bed at 8:30. You'd like to ignore them, but you can't quite shake the feeling that the angel over your pillow is keeping a tally. Out in the hallway, someone rings a bell with the solemn urgency of a cathedral service, letting the entire house know that his lordship is awake, or at least upright. If you're wondering why your feet are cold, it's because the bed is roughly 12 feet long, and Victorian central heating is not a thing. Instead, there's a coal fire smouldering in the hearth, tended through the night by a shivering under-butler who dreams of unionizing. Across the room, a morning suit and 3 shirt options are laid out by your valet, because apparently, choosing your own clothes is a dangerous game best left to professionals. You may wish to stretch, but beware. The bed canopy has more elaborate fringe than a music festival, and knocking loose even a single tassel means 6 people will spend the morning rehanging it. The windows are triple locked, partly for security, but mostly because the outside world is full of poor people and fresh air, 2 things best kept at bay. Your first interaction is with a housemaid who brings you your morning water, lukewarm and precisely 7/8 full. You nod in gratitude. She curtsies as if you're royalty, and immediately apologizes for the water's temperature, the lateness of the paper, and the existential despair of Victorian plumbing. Someone else, possibly the butler, possibly a ghost, hovers just out of sight, ready to clear the glass away the moment you blink. As you contemplate getting up, you notice your dressing gown is nowhere to be seen. That's because it's been spirited away to be pressed, repressed, and perfumed with something called essence of empire. In its place, you find a pair of impractical slippers lined with the softest sheep you've ever not met. Putting them on is an adventure, because they are roughly the size and shape of actual sheep. The process of actually leaving bed is more complicated than most modern tax returns. First, you summon your valet, who helps you into a robe with more embroidery than the Bayeux tapestry. Then, you're ushered to a chair that exists solely for the purpose of sitting while someone else brushes your hair. Your schedule for the day is recited: breakfast at 9, correspondence at 10, and perhaps, if you're feeling ambitious, a light stroll through the conservatory, which you haven't actually entered since the Crimean War. Somewhere between stretches and slippers, you wonder if this is all a bit much. But then you recall that to be a Victorian millionaire, is not about comfort, but about demonstrating to anyone within a 5-mile radius that you are, in fact, very, very important, and have the blankets to prove it. Your morning is less a routine and more a performance, every act designed to signal status, breed envy, and possibly confuse the dog. Even the smallest details, how you drink your water, how you accept the news of a mild dip in stocks, how you don your slippers with the solemnity of a coronation, are watched, judged, and reported back to the cook by lunchtime. By the time you finally stand, swaddled in wool and existential dread, you're ready to face the day, or at least ready to face breakfast, which, if tradition holds, will involve more cutlery than a royal wedding and, if you're lucky, only a handful of further apologies. Congratulations, you've survived your first hour as a Victorian millionaire. Only 23 more to go. Forget a simple morning shower. Your bathroom is a wonderland of porcelain, marble, and plumbing that groans ominously every time you dare to bathe. The water's either scalding or glacial, and there's a non-zero chance a footman is waiting to hand you a towel with the sort of reverence most people reserve for the Magna Carta. You may fancy the idea of a soothing soak, but Victorian bathrooms are less about relaxation and more about survival. Entering your personal water closet feels like stepping into a cross between a Roman bathhouse and a laboratory experiment gone wrong. The tiles are so cold your toes threaten to go on strike, and the bathtub itself could comfortably host a small regatta. Somewhere in the distance, the pipes begin to shudder in protest, an ominous prelude to what's coming. It's important to remember that, as a Victorian millionaire, you're expected to wash regularly, but never so often as to seem French. Bathing is a delicate dance, too little, and you're accused of being peasant, adjacent, too much, and the neighbours talk. There's also the small matter of the plumbing, which was designed by someone who read about hot water in a magazine but never actually tried it. The complicated tangle of pipes hisses, rattles, and occasionally erupts in a fit of Victorian melodrama, leaving you with a choice: ice bucket challenge or lobster boil. No part of this process is solitary. While you may fantasize about privacy, your ablutions are a communal event featuring the bath attendant, the towel boy, the valet, and, sometimes, a plumber who lives in the walls and only emerges when disaster strikes. Modesty is maintained by a delicate arrangement of folding screens, quick glances, and the unspoken agreement that nobody mentions the time the hot tap launched itself across the room. Your porcelain throne, literally a throne, with an upholstered seat and more carvings than most churches, sits in a tiny, echoey room off the main bath. The water closet, as it's known, is both a marvel of engineering and a test of faith. Indoor plumbing is a modern miracle, but it's also a gamble. Every flush is a spin of the roulette wheel. Will it be a gentle gurgle, or will the system rebel, causing a minor tsunami and an emergency meeting of the household staff? Bathwater is drawn with great ceremony. Buckets are ferried from the kitchen by red-faced servants, who then consult the almanac to predict whether today's water will be clear, brown, or mysterious. If you're lucky enough to have running water, you can enjoy the thrill of hot and cold taps that operate independently, forcing you to master the fine art of alternating scalding and hypothermia. Getting the temperature right is less spa day and more chemistry midterm. Soap comes in the form of scented bars so hard you could use them to defend your honour in a duel. Towels are fluffy, if slightly damp from the eternal British climate, and monogrammed with your initials, just in case you forget who you are halfway through the ordeal. A footman stands by, eyes averted, ready to offer a towel with all the gravity of a coronation sword. Toothbrushing is performed with a stiff bristle and an abrasive powder containing chalk, charcoal, and the lingering regret of anyone who's ever had a cavity. There is, of course, a dedicated glass for rinsing, kept on a silver tray next to a bottle of lavender water, some rose-scented vinegar, and a mysterious jar labelled pomade that no one has dared open since the Crimean War. No matter how efficiently you plan, something will go wrong. Perhaps the boiler hiccups and fills the room with clouds of steam so dense you lose your way back to the towel rack. Maybe the pipes rattle until the dog hides under the chaise longue. Or, in a moment of true Victorian chaos, a servant slips, a bucket falls, and suddenly the marble floor is awash in soapy water, your dignity drifting with the suds. By the end, you're slightly cleaner, deeply humbled, and newly grateful for indoor plumbing, even if it does threaten to explode every other Tuesday. You emerge from the bathroom red-cheeked, towel-draped, and ready to face the next challenge, getting dressed by committee. In Victorian England, cleanliness is close to godliness, but achieving it feels suspiciously close to farce. Dressing isn't just an activity, it's a team sport. A valet, a maid, and possibly an entire battalion are on standby as you wedge yourself into starched collars, endless buttons, and a corset, if you're feeling fancy or unlucky. By the end, you're sweating like a coal miner, except you own the mine. The day begins with a brisk knock on your dressing room door. The valet enters, arms piled high with garments, trousers so stiff they could stand on their own, shirts with collars sharp enough to draw blood, and at least 3 waistcoats, because nothing says wealth like the ability to lose a waistcoat and not notice for days. The maid arrives with a fresh pair of gloves, 4 shoehorns, and a look in her eye that says she's still not over last week's cufflink incident. Your first obstacle is the undergarment, a complicated set of linen drawers and a long-sleeved undershirt that would, in any sane century, be considered pyjamas. This is the only comfortable part of the process, so enjoy it. Next comes the corset. And yes, if you're a gentleman of a certain standing or a lady of any standing at all, you might be persuaded, pressured, or outright bullied into one. The goal is to achieve the silhouette of a fashionable hourglass or a well-upholstered wardrobe, depending on personal ambition and core strength. Once you've survived the corset, now winded, slightly shorter, and questioning your life choices, it's time for the shirt. The shirt must be starched to the consistency of drywall and fastened with studs so fiddly they have their own entry in the family ledger. The collar is next, and it's less an article of clothing and more a device for testing your pain tolerance. It sits high on your neck, unyielding, ready to gently choke you every time you turn your head. At this point, your valet appears to have joined forces with the maid, and the two begin a synchronized choreography of buttoning, straightening, and forcibly tucking. If you're a lady, things become even more involved. Chemise, stays, corset cover, petticoats, yes, plural, bustle, and at least one layer whose sole purpose is to ensure your dress stands at a 90-degree angle from your waist. Skirts are lowered over your head like you're being dressed for a theatrical performance by a crew that can only communicate via dramatic sighs and the occasional pin. Bodices are laced, sashes tied, bows adjusted, and suddenly you realize you haven't actually put on the dress yet. Accessories follow, and each is more absurdly specific than the last. Gloves for morning, gloves for riding, gloves for waving at people you'd rather avoid. Shoes with buttons so tiny they require a special hook. Never mind that you'll have to remove them in 6 hours for a change of outfit. Brooches, hat pins, watch fobs, and for gentlemen, a pocket watch on a chain that exists purely to tell people you're too important to be on time. Hats are mandatory. For men, it's a top hat so tall it's a danger to low-hanging chandeliers. For women, a concoction of feathers, ribbons and small birds, sometimes real, sometimes not, perched precariously atop a nest of pins. One careless sneeze and you're trending in the morning paper. And the layers, always more layers. Waistcoat, frock coat, overcoat, cape. If it's winter, add a muff, scarf, and an existential crisis about whether you'll ever be able to bend at the waist again. If it's summer, congratulations. You're now marinating in your own wealth. By the time you're dressed, you've sweated through 3 layers, your corset is arguing with your lungs, and you're already late for breakfast, which will of course require a napkin, monogrammed, naturally, to dab your brow. A final inspection in the mirror by your valet, a lint brush to the shoulder by the maid, and a discreet adjustment of your cravat. You step into the hallway, ready to begin your day, or at least ready to sit down and recover from the trauma of getting dressed. Your appearance says success, but your internal monologue says send help. Congratulations, you're now fully clothed, completely exhausted, and have already achieved more before breakfast than most people manage in a week. And you're definitely never, ever getting those 20 minutes of your life back. You join your family in a dining room roughly the size of a modern airport lounge. Breakfast is a parade of kippers, kidneys, jams, and enough tea to refloat the British Navy. There's a strict seating order. Eye contact is a political statement, and the toast is, once again, cold. You enter the room with all the solemnity of a state visit. Sunlight pours in through windows taller than most Victorian children, illuminating a table that stretches toward the horizon. Each chair is positioned with the precision of a military campaign, and heaven help the unfortunate soul who sits out of order. At the head of the table is the family patriarch, reading the Times with an intensity normally reserved for hostage negotiations. The matriarch presides over the tea service like a high priestess conducting a sacred rite. Children are arrayed in descending order of usefulness or noisiness. A footman, whose main job appears to be radiating disapproval, hovers behind your chair, prepared to rescue you from errant crumbs or an accidental jam spill. Silverware gleams, plates are stacked just so, and the napkin, starched to a level unknown to modern science, lies across your lap like a flag of surrender. You are not so much eating breakfast as you are performing it, with all the anxious choreography of an amateur ballet. The menu is both lavish and intimidating. There are eggs, soft-boiled, hard-boiled, possibly philosophically boiled. Next, a heaping platter of bacon, rashers so thick you could re-sole your shoes with them. The kidneys glisten ominously, daring you to remember what they actually are. If you want to play it safe, there's always the bread basket. Fresh rolls, scones, and, naturally, slices of toast so cold and rigid they could double as roofing material. The only thing guaranteed to be piping hot is the tea, and even that requires a full council meeting to decide whose cup is poured first. Breakfast conversation is, at best, stilted. There are unwritten rules. Children speak only if addressed. Adults speak only about topics the patriarch approves, and under no circumstances should anyone mention bodily functions, Americans, or last night's dream involving the vicar and a runaway pig. Most comments are limited to, "Pass the marmalade, please," or "How lovely the roses look in the conservatory this morning," which is code for, "I know you're hiding the good jam, Aunt Edith." If you dare make eye contact with your sibling, you run the risk of igniting a diplomatic incident over who finished the strawberry preserves. The family dog sits under the table, hoping to catch a fallen sausage or, failing that, a moment of affection from anyone brave enough to break protocol. The youngest child, perched on a pile of cushions, pokes suspiciously at a kipper, dreaming of the day when breakfast will include something invented after 1890. Your grandmother, swaddled in black lace and decades of accumulated resentment, sips her tea with the air of someone who survived the siege of Sebastopol and found it less stressful than this morning's seating plan. Halfway through, the butler glides in to announce the latest headline: a minor stock fluctuation, a royal engagement, or, if it's a particularly exciting morning, the unexpected arrival of a distant cousin who's come to take the waters and definitely not borrow money. This is received with polite nods, a flurry of teaspoons, and the silent calculation of who can claim a sudden, urgent appointment elsewhere. Every detail of the meal is choreographed. Forks and knives are wielded with military precision. Butter is spread so thinly on toast that you begin to suspect it's a metaphor for your family's emotional life. If a crumb escapes, the hovering footman is there with a brush and a look that says he knows where you keep your embarrassing childhood sketches. When you finally finish, you mustn't just leave. There's a procedure. Napkin folded, chair pushed in, a murmured, "Thank you, mother." Any deviation, and you risk being discussed at length in the drawing room before lunch. You rise, stomach full but soul slightly emptied, and prepare for the next battle. Morning correspondence. But take heart. In Victorian England, Breakfast wasn't just the most important meal of the day. It was the opening skirmish in a daily war of etiquette, family politics, and bread that could survive the apocalypse. You don't do chores, you do management. Your home runs on a staff of dozens, each with a job so specific it may never be performed. The butler runs the house, the cook runs the kitchen, and the scullery maid mostly runs away from the cook. Your main task is pretending you know their names. Life as a Victorian millionaire is, above all else, a never-ending game of who moved my cheese and which one of you is cheese footman. Your days are spent gliding from one polished room to another, while the house hums with the quiet panic of people desperately trying to avoid being noticed. At any given moment, your mansion contains an entire ecosystem of human labor, one in which you are the apex predator, and everyone else has developed advanced camouflage. The butler is the general, presiding over the household staff with the unyielding gravity of a Greek god and the moustache of a particularly serious walrus. He speaks in measured tones, moves only at dignified speeds, and knows every single thing that happens within a mile of the silver cupboard. His chief responsibility, making sure you never notice that things occasionally go wrong. If you ever spot the butler sprinting, immediately evacuate the premises. Below him in the pecking order is the housekeeper, whose keys jangle with the faint menace of a medieval jailer and whose stare can reduce a grown footman to a blubbering apology. She is the true master of the house, running the female staff with military efficiency and the kind of scheduling rigor that would frighten Google. The cook rules the kitchen, a world apart, filled with clouds of steam, shrieks of panic, and a perpetual undertone of passive-aggressive pastry making. The mere suggestion that you might like breakfast at 9:30 instead of 9 sharp can spark a minor insurrection. The scullery maid, the lowest creature in the household food chain, lives in constant terror of the cook and spends her days frantically washing mountains of dishes and her nights composing tragic poetry about gravy. There are footmen who exist mostly to carry things from one room to another and look decorative in livery. They move in synchronized pairs, like highly trained penguins, and open doors with such flourish you'd think there was a competition for most dramatic entry. There's also a valet, whose job is to keep you from dressing yourself, and who greets each of your fashion choices with a look of subtle, deeply British disappointment. Laundry maids, chambermaids, gardeners, lamplighters, stable boys, and coachmen all form part of this elaborate backstage crew. The lamplighter's job is to float through the house at dusk, igniting dozens of gas lamps with a long pole and the posture of a disappointed fencing instructor. The gardener maintains the grounds so meticulously that a stray dandelion is treated like an act of rebellion. The nursery is ruled with an iron rattle by the nanny, a woman of indeterminate age and infinite patience, who can quiet a screaming child with a single glare and a spoonful of tonic, mysterious, possibly gin. In her realm, parents are merely background noise, occasionally summoned for public appearances or the annual family portrait. The oddest roles are the ones invented purely to absorb surplus relatives or keep up with the Joneses. Do you really need a pudding maid? Probably not, but you can't risk being the only family on the square without one. What about the footboy? His main duty is to stand in the hallway looking slightly confused. He's very good at it. Managing all this is less about authority and more about diplomacy. The trick is to appear grateful without ever learning anyone's actual name. You rely on you there, and my good man more than you'd like to admit. Once, you called the gardener cook by accident and were exiled from the rose garden for a month. You still haven't recovered. Most of the time, the servant army is invisible, slipping in and out of rooms like particularly judgmental ghosts. But occasionally, you catch a whisper or a side-eye as you pass, a reminder that while you may be the master, they're the ones who know where the good sherry is hidden, and exactly what you did at last year's Christmas party. If all else fails, remember this rule. Tip generously, apologize often, and never, under any circumstances, ask the scullery maid for her tragic gravy poem. Some things are better left unspoken, even in the grandest of houses. Every outfit is a silent resume, a test of how many fabrics you can layer before collapsing from heatstroke. Clothes signal not just taste but bank balance, meaning half your wardrobe is devoted to being pointedly uncomfortable, just to show that you can. To be a Victorian millionaire is to exist in a world where your social status is measured in buttons, ribbons, and yards of imported lace. Your appearance is less about personal style and more about providing a public service announcement. Yes, I have money, and yes, I intend to suffer for it. There's no such thing as dressing down. Even the concept of casual Friday would have you blacklisted from society and possibly exiled to France. Each morning begins with the same existential dilemma. Silk or satin, velvet or brocade, or perhaps all of them at once. For gentlemen, the rule is simple. If your suit can stand up without you in it, you're halfway there. Lapels are wide enough to be used as gliders, and your waistcoat is embroidered so elaborately it could double as a family crest. The pockets are purely decorative, because heaven forbid you actually carry anything. Your tailor has spent the last week stitching your monogram into the lining, just in case you forget which jacket belongs to you, or more likely which one you wore to yesterday's luncheon. For women, fashion is a high-stakes game of textile engineering. A successful outfit may involve 3 petticoats, a whalebone corset, and a hoop skirt large enough to house small livestock. Dresses are chosen not for comfort, but for their ability to communicate. I can afford silk from China and ostrich feathers from places I can't even spell. Walking through a doorway becomes a tactical operation, requiring careful angling and, occasionally, the temporary removal of walls. Accessories are where things get truly unhinged. No look is complete without at least one violently large hat, preferably covered in dead birds and enough netting to ensnare passing insects. Jewelry isn't so much worn as deployed. Brooches the size of saucers, bracelets jangling like a tiny blacksmith shop, and necklaces so heavy you develop a permanent stoop. Pocket watches, tie pins, and cameos all serve the same purpose, to loudly announce your assets without ever speaking a word. Shoes are a unique torment. For men, they're polished to a shine that could blind a moth at 50 paces, and for women, they're delicate confections of ribbon and leather, wholly unsuited for anything resembling walking. The pain is the point. If you can run for the omnibus, you're dressed incorrectly. The seasonal changes only add to the drama. Summer requires white gloves, linen suits, and the delicate art of pretending not to sweat. Winter brings furs, muffs, capes, and the sudden pressing question of whether your ears will freeze before the carriage arrives. Umbrellas become fashion statements, their handles carved from ivory or mother of pearl, the fabric dyed to match your mood or, more likely, your social ambitions. Fashion magazines land on your doorstep every week, each issue full of diagrams, stern warnings, and illustrations of French people wearing things that may or may not be legal in England. To keep up is to court bankruptcy. To fall behind is social death. Your maid or valet is tasked with not only remembering the correct order of your accessories, but also offering gentle reminders like, "Sir, you wore that cravat to Lady Pembroke's Thursday tea, and the Dowager Countess did not approve." The most important rule of all: comfort is a sin, and utility is treason. Why have pockets when you can have a reticule the size of a postage stamp? Why wear simple sleeves when you can have sleeves so billowy they require their own hat? So, every morning, you armor yourself in fabric and pearls, your outfit a battle cry in the ongoing war of upward mobility. Step out the door, suffocating in splendor, and prepare to be seen, judged, and, if you're lucky, envied. Or at the very least, pitied by anyone who knows what it feels like to faint into a decorative fountain during a garden party. Congratulations, you look like £1,000,000, mainly because you're wearing half of it. With no TV, internet, or even reliable electricity, the Victorian millionaire's entertainment comes in the form of parlour games, musical evenings, and forced conversation. If you're desperate, You might even try reading your own novel aloud. Bad idea. Imagine it's a Wednesday night in 1878. There's no scrolling, streaming, or doom scrolling, just the tick of a grandfather clock and the sound of the butler laying yet another log on the fire. Guests arrive dressed as if they expect to be painted, and you settle into the parlour, an expanse of patterned carpet and faintly accusatory family portraits, ready to fill several hours without so much as a crossword puzzle to save you. The first order of business: parlour games. These are not for the faint of heart. Popular options include charades, which is less about clever mime and more about Aunt Beatrice's inability to distinguish between Macbeth and a sheep with gout. There's also the Minister's Cat, a game requiring rapid-fire adjectives, questionable spelling, and the willpower to keep a straight face when someone inevitably says, "The minister's cat is a scandalous cat." You laugh politely, knowing full well the actual minister's cat has never recovered from last year's scandal. If your guests are feeling particularly intellectual, you might play Consequences, a collaborative story game that inevitably devolves into a surrealist masterpiece starring Lord Piddlington and a mysterious turnip. Paper, pens, and an almost unhealthy appetite for social chaos are required. Bonus points if you can sneak in a mild insult about the host's taste in drapes. But the true backbone of the evening is music. Someone is always volunteered to play the piano, a duty that falls to whichever cousin is most easily guilted or least able to fake a sprained wrist. The repertoire is relentless. Nocturnes, mazurkas, and if you're very unlucky, a spirited medley of sea shanties performed on the concertina. The only thing more dangerous than refusing to applaud is requesting an encore. For the less musically inclined, there's always the option of dramatic readings. Perhaps you bring out a thick volume of Tennyson, or worse, try reading your own novel to an audience with the collective attention span of a distracted poodle. As you drone on about tragic heroines and windswept moors, your guests do their best to appear moved, though more than one stifles a yawn behind an embroidered handkerchief. You realise too late that even your own butler is staring wistfully at the door. Conversation is a game in itself, governed by strict Victorian rules. Safe topics include the weather, the Queen's latest hat, and whether or not the train to Bath is running on time. Dangerous territory, politics, personal feelings, or any mention of plumbing. Lulls in conversation are filled by strategic coughing, rearranging of calling cards, or a quick round of who can name the most minor royal relatives without crying. If you're lucky, the evening might feature a visit from the resident magician or a demonstration of the new stereoscope, an exciting device that shows slightly blurry images of someone else's holiday in Brighton. This passes for mind-blowing entertainment in a world where even the flicker of a gas lamp is a thrill. Occasionally, games of whist or cribbage break out among the elders, who play with the seriousness of championship boxers and the slyness of card sharks. The children are banished to the nursery, where they can amuse themselves with marbles, spinning tops, and the eternal dream of escaping to a century with cartoons. As the evening wears on, so does your patience. You begin to yearn for the sweet release of bedtime or a minor emergency that requires you to leave the parlour. But duty calls. You must remain, sipping tepid tea and applauding yet another variation on chopsticks, until at last the grandfather clock strikes an hour even the Victorians consider unreasonable. You bid your guests good night, comforted by the knowledge that tomorrow brings another evening of identical entertainment. Sleep comes swiftly, if only to protect you from the terrifying prospect of having to mime the charge of the Light Brigade in front of your in-laws again. Lunch and dinner are both culinary marathons featuring a dozen courses, half of which are designed to confuse your palate and the other half to clog your arteries. The wine list is longer than your family tree, and if you're still hungry after dessert, that's what the cold pie on your nightstand is for. The meal begins long before you ever see a crumb. A battalion of cooks, scullery maids, and trembling kitchen boys have already spent hours wrestling with aspics, juggling custards, and threatening a roast pheasant with a gravy boat. The dinner bell rings with the gravity of a royal summons, calling you and your well-dressed kin to the gleaming mahogany table, every inch of it groaning beneath candelabras, crystal, and a parade of decorative fruit displays that are, frankly, more intimidating than appetizing. You sit down and brace yourself. Victorian dining is an endurance sport, and the rules are clear. Pace yourself, never appear eager, and for heaven's sake, never admit you don't know which fork to use. The first course arrives, usually a mysterious consommé, so clear and insubstantial you begin to question if there's anything in your bowl at all. This is followed by fish, then a joint of beef, then some kind of game bird stuffed inside another game bird, and possibly a pie that contains both for good measure. Between courses, your plate is whisked away by an army of servants whose sole purpose appears to be ensuring you never glimpse the bottom of your china. Each dish arrives with a name so elaborate it sounds like a minor European principality. Filet of sole à la reine with oyster forcemeat, or salmis of woodcock with chartreuse of celery. You nod approvingly, pretending you have any idea what you're eating. Vegetables are present, but they're mainly decorative. Peas glazed with enough butter to lubricate a steam engine, carrots sculpted into roses, and potatoes mashed so finely they resemble Victorian plasterwork. If you're especially unlucky, you'll encounter aspic, a gelatinous dish beloved by the era's chefs but feared by everyone else. There's nothing quite like the sensation of cold, wobbly calf's foot jelly sliding ominously across your plate while your neighbour politely pretends not to notice. Wine is mandatory, and in quantities that would make a modern sommelier faint. Each course is paired with a new vintage, described in reverent tones by a footman who's memorized the script but has never tasted the goods. You swirl, sniff, and sip, while quietly hoping the fish course wine will drown out the memory of the aspic. By dessert, you're not sure if you're tipsy, triumphant, or teetering on the edge of gout. The desserts themselves are a riot of Victorian ingenuity and poor judgment. Towers of spun sugar, cakes so dense they threaten the table's structural integrity, and trifles layered with so much sherry that the children are gently discouraged from partaking. There are fruits, always peeled, cored, and presented with surgical precision, and cheeses so pungent they could be classified as weapons. Pudding is both a specific dish and a general threat. It could be suet, sponge, or surprise. It's never optional. The meal ends, not with satisfaction, but with resignation. The gentlemen retire to the drawing room for port and cigars. The ladies drift off for coffee and the ritual comparing of hats. You, meanwhile, are left to reflect on the fact that, despite the sheer quantity of food, you're already planning a midnight raid on the aforementioned cold pie, perhaps accompanied by a little leftover cheese, assuming it hasn't walked off under its own power. Being a Victorian millionaire means eating like royalty, but digesting like a peasant, stuffed, slightly dazed, and quietly fearing the next course. And somewhere, in the shadowy corridors of the kitchen, the cook is already plotting tomorrow's menu, and the cycle of culinary overkill begins anew. Your children are more fashion accessories than family members, presented in frilly clothes and only brought out for guests, holidays, or occasional scoldings. They're mostly raised by nannies, and occasionally seen peering at you from behind an urn. To the outside world, your Victorian offspring are miniature advertisements for your family's social standing, paraded out in matching sailor suits and white pinafores, as crisp and unsullied as a new banknote. Each child's hair is parted with the precision of railway tracks. Their shoes shine to a mirror finish by someone who probably isn't even legally old enough to vote. At social gatherings, they line up like the world's most anxious chess pieces, curtsying and bowing with the stiff politeness of people who have been bribed with the promise of extra plum pudding. But behind the scenes, the true work of raising your heirs falls to a shadowy cabal of nannies, governesses, tutors, and, if you're truly fashionable, a foreign-speaking mademoiselle who claims to be teaching French but is mostly just practicing her English. These professionals preside over the nursery like benevolent despots, orchestrating a regime of lessons, walks, and, if the weather's not too dreadful, military-grade outdoor exercise. You, meanwhile, are free to pursue important adult business, like arranging the table settings for next Thursday's luncheon or worrying that your child's violin practice is 2 years behind schedule. When the children are allowed downstairs, It's an event requiring military coordination. First comes the warning. Children will be present at tea. Servants dash to remove any fragile heirlooms. The family dog is banished outside, and a bowl of boiled sweets is strategically positioned to bribe good behavior. Your own role is mostly ceremonial. Nod approvingly, ask a question about their studies, and try not to look alarmed when one announces they've been collecting frogs in the fountain. Discipline is a complicated ritual, passed down through a combination of stern governesses, Victorian morality tales, and a rotating cast of terrifying aunts. If a child misbehaves, by, for example, expressing an opinion or laughing at the wrong volume, there is a short, dignified lecture about the family name, followed by the removal of pudding privileges or, in extreme cases, a threat to send them to boarding school in Scotland, which even adults agree is a fate worse than most. Education is essential, but the curriculum varies. Boys are groomed for Oxford, politics, and the vague hope of avoiding bankruptcy. Girls are drilled in French, music, embroidery, and the vital art of not fainting during waltzes. Both are expected to ride horses, quote Latin, and never ever talk back to a grandparent who may reward good behavior with an inscrutable family heirloom, like a ceremonial spoon or a taxidermied owl. Even playtime is a performance. Toys are elaborate. Tin soldiers, porcelain dolls, rocking horses, and puzzles so complicated you half suspect they're training your heirs for a future in espionage. Outdoor games are strictly supervised, with fresh air considered both a moral and medical obligation. You may catch a fleeting glimpse of your children through the morning mist, marching across the lawn under the stern gaze of nurse, bundled in so many layers they resemble well-dressed scarecrows. Emotional closeness is encouraged, at a distance. Hugs are rare, displays of affection are rationed, and bedtime stories are read by candlelight, from volumes containing more moral lessons than actual plot. Family portraits are annual ordeals, involving 20 minutes of forced stillness, an outburst of tears, and at least one child with their eyes closed for posterity. Of course, the greatest anxiety is the matter of heirs. The eldest son is the future of the family, groomed for title and estate, while the other children must content themselves with marriage, the clergy, or the delicate art of not causing scandal. Sibling rivalry is not only tolerated, it's practically built into the architecture of the nursery. Every accomplishment, from Latin grammar to straight posture, is tallied and quietly ranked. So, while your children may be seen and occasionally heard, they exist in a separate, parallel universe, a world of starch, etiquette, and the ever-present threat of boarding school. Your legacy depends on them, your reputation is built around them, but heaven help you if you ever have to supervise bath time. Victorian parenting, a job best left to the professionals. It's not enough to be rich. You must be eccentric. Enter the parade of lapdogs in tiny bonnets, parrots that speak 3 languages, and the ever-present horse named after your least favourite cousin. In the world of the Victorian millionaire, a pet is not just a companion, it's a status symbol, a conversation starter, and, in many cases, a living, barking excuse to spend more money on embroidery. If your pug doesn't have a cashmere-lined basket, a seasonal wardrobe, and a diet better than most orphans, are you even trying? Your friends might have a dog, but does their dog own a silver water bowl, hand-stitched boots for muddy walks, or a commemorative portrait in the drawing room? No. In this gilded menagerie, pets are family, fashion, and furniture all rolled into one. Dogs reign supreme, especially the ones small enough to fit in a teapot and loud enough to be heard in the next county. They are bathed in lavender water, dressed for every occasion, and introduced to guests as if they're foreign dignitaries. Your lapdog's wardrobe includes raincoats, party frocks, and a tiny sailor suit for those impromptu nautical outings. You'll find yourself apologizing if your terrier's morning cravat clashes with the parlor curtains, and more than once, you've had to explain to the butler why there's a tiny top hat floating in the punch bowl. But dogs are just the beginning. Parrots are highly prized. particularly if they can say witty things in French, quote, Shakespeare, or deliver a biting impression of the local vicar. A parrot that only repeats Pretty Polly is considered embarrassingly middle class. Exotic birds, turtles, rabbits, and even the occasional monkey or marmoset complete your collection, each with their own elaborate cage and dedicated caretaker. The more unusual your pet, the more conversations you'll spark, provided your guests aren't allergic, squeamish, or carrying a fainting couch. Of course, you can't neglect your horse. Every self-respecting household requires a stable of well-groomed, slightly neurotic horses, each one named after an obscure family member or minor British general. Your riding horse wears custom tack, dines on apples and oats, and, like you, is expected to look dashing while leaping over hedges or being led in circles for visiting guests. The stable is a kingdom unto itself, run by a head groom who knows more family secrets than your butler and will occasionally lend a sympathetic ear when you need to complain about Aunt Ethel's peacock. Peacocks, incidentally, are a must-have if you're aiming for maximum eccentricity. No Victorian garden is complete without a few of these shrieking, jewel-toned birds strutting about, terrifying the help and occasionally frightening the postman into early retirement. Their primary purpose is to look fabulous during garden parties and remind everyone that your lawn is more opulent than most wedding venues. Pets, however, are just the beginning of the pastime parade. The afternoons stretch on, filled with leisure activities that range from the genteel to the unhinged. Croquet, archery, and lawn tennis are all respectable options, provided your opponent knows the correct way to feint gracefully in defeat. If the weather turns, the family might retreat indoors for games of whist, needlepoint, or the eternal torment of learning the flute from cousin Penelope, who believes herself a musical prodigy. If you're feeling especially adventurous, you might host a pet show or a fancy dress parade, complete with prizes for best-dressed tortoise or loudest ferret. These events are equal parts chaos and social climbing, as neighbours try to outdo each other with increasingly ridiculous pets and elaborate stories about their origins. You nod along, pretending to believe Lord Cumberfield's claim that his cockatoo once attended tea with Queen Victoria. In the end, the goal is simple: to amuse yourself, astonish your guests, and maybe, just maybe, find a hobby that doesn't involve embroidering the family crest onto a hamster's waistcoat. If nothing else, you'll never be bored, surrounded as you are by a chorus of barks, chirps, neighs, and the soft, judgmental flutter of peacock feathers. Social advancement is a blood sport, played with calling cards, formal visits, and tea parties where everyone pretends to like each other's hats. Remember, one wrong fork, and you're socially exiled to Cornwall. In Victorian high society, being rich is only half the battle. The other half is convincing the right people you're rich in exactly the right way. Welcome to the world of calling cards, a world where your entire reputation can rise or fall on the quality of your stationery, the crispness of your handwriting, and whether you remembered to emboss your title in gold, silver, or the ever-daring burgundy. The ritual begins at the door. You never simply show up. You must be announced by the butler, who will accept your card on a silver tray, examining it as if it's a specimen in a laboratory. Your card is not just a piece of paper, it's your passport, your business card, and your only line of defense against social oblivion. A card with a folded corner means you came in person. A card with a black border means someone died, possibly of boredom at your last luncheon. Once your card is deposited, you're in the game. Visits are meticulously scheduled and, ideally, shorter than the average sneeze. The morning call may take place any time between noon and the vague hope of dusk. You're ushered into the parlour for a strictly limited conversation about the weather, local scandals, and how clever it was for Lady Blenkinsop to name her new lapdog after the Prime Minister. If your host is truly fond of you, or your fortune, you'll be invited to stay for tea, an ordeal that involves a dizzying array of china, scones, jam, and about 36 types of cake, all of which you must consume while looking like you haven't eaten in days. Conversation is a dance of compliments, humble brags, and the ever-present threat of a faux pas. Remember, never praise a rival's dress too enthusiastically. They'll know you're lying. Never mention trade or money directly vulgar. And never, ever ask how someone's husband made his fortune. If you get desperate, pivot to hats. Everyone has opinions about hats. Then there are the tea parties, which are equal parts networking event and psychological warfare. Tea is poured by the lady of the house, who wields the teapot like a scepter. You take sugar. 1 lump means you're traditional, 2 means you're an upstart, and 3 means you'll be whispered about until Michaelmas. Saucers are for looking at, never for slurping. The correct fork for cakes is the one furthest from your plate, unless you're in company so fashionable that forks have been banned entirely in favour of tiny, decorative tongs. Every encounter is an opportunity, or a trap. Invitations to balls, dinners, and country weekends are handed out like golden tickets. Each one a potential stepping stone or banana peel. A single misstep, arriving late, choosing the wrong partner for a quadrille, or wearing last season's colour, could see you relegated to the social hinterlands, forced to spend your afternoons visiting elderly relatives and watching your ambitions fade like the gilt on a cheap candelabrum. To stay afloat, you must collect, organise, and remember an ever-growing stack of calling cards, each one annotated with secret notes. Talks too much about cats, dangerous at whist, unclear on boundaries and napkin etiquette. A special silver tray sits in your entrance hall, groaning under the weight of social obligation. Woe betide the household whose tray is empty. That way lies social extinction. Ultimately, social climbing is a test of stamina, memory, and the ability to say, "What a simply marvellous bonnet," 50 times an hour, without dissolving into laughter or existential dread. The prizes are fleeting, an invitation, a compliment, your name mentioned in the correct column of the newspaper, but the consequences of failure are forever. Miss a call, lose a card, or, heaven forbid, spill jam on a duchess, and you might as well pack for Cornwall. So you persevere. Because in Victorian England, the only thing more dangerous than losing your money is losing your place. And all it takes is one well-timed card and an iron constitution for tea. City mansions are nice, but the true status symbol is a drafty, haunted manor in the countryside. Owning 1,000 acres means you never see most of it, unless you get lost on your way to breakfast. The country house is the Victorian millionaire's badge of honour, proof that you've truly arrived, or at the very least, that you have enough money to heat 17 mostly empty rooms and employ a small village of people to argue about the best way to polish a suit of armour. Your arrival is always an event. The carriage wheels crunching over gravel, footmen rushing out like a flock of startled geese, and a housekeeper waiting in the wings to give you the quarterly report on bats in the belfry. Every surface in the house has a story, most of which involve previous owners, eccentric relatives, or unfortunate pets who failed to grasp the concept of gravity. Portraits of grim ancestors stare down from wood-panelled walls, daring you to redecorate. The library is stuffed with books that haven't been opened since Queen Victoria's coronation, and the sitting room smells faintly of lavender, old boots, and secrets. If you stand very still, you can hear the faint, ghostly echo of someone having a nervous breakdown over the cost of firewood. Of course, it wouldn't be a proper country house without a draft. No matter how many tapestries you hang or how fiercely the maids battle the windows, there's always a chilly breeze lurking just around the corner, ready to give you a cold or, if you're unlucky, a new nervous complaint. During winter, your breath clouds in the air as you wander. Endless corridors wrapped in 3 shawls and a sense of historical foreboding. During summer, the place becomes a greenhouse for rare spiders and various strains of mildew not yet catalogued by science. Breakfast is an epic journey. You set out from your bedroom with the hope of hot tea and a soft-boiled egg, but somewhere between the blue salon and the east corridor, you find yourself inexplicably in the trophy room, surrounded by glass-eyed foxes and a taxidermied hedgehog in formal wear. You shout for help, but the only reply is the distant sound of a grandfather clock chiming in another time zone. The grounds are just as overwhelming. Acres of parkland, mysterious follies, a lake inhabited by swans with anger management issues, and a maze so fiendish you once lost your cousin in it for most of Lent. The garden is tended by a head gardener who regards you with suspicion, convinced you'll ask to plant something modern. He is assisted by a battalion of undergardeners who spend their days trimming hedges into shapes only visible to the truly optimistic. Country life isn't all roses and accidental hypothermia. The social calendar is relentless. Weekends are filled with hunting parties, archery, and the sort of picnics where you sit on a blanket while silently feuding with your neighbours over the correct way to serve cucumber sandwiches. The evenings bring dinners that drag on for hours, punctuated by ghost stories, minor scandals, and the occasional family séance. Nothing breaks the ice like summoning Great-Aunt Mildred to complain about the plumbing. When night falls, the house becomes an acoustic wonderland. Floorboards creak, windows rattle, and the wind howls in a way that would make even the bravest butler question his life choices. You fumble for a candle and attempt to navigate back to your room, only to find yourself in the attic, with a sudden, inexplicable urge to rewrite your will. In the end, owning a country house is a full-time hobby. It requires stamina, a love of draughts, both the alcoholic and chilly variety, and the ability to feign delight at endless guided tours for visiting city relatives. You might never see all of your land, but you'll certainly hear about every broken gate and suspicious molehill for the rest of your days. Congratulations, you've made it. You own the countryside, and it owns you right back. Your wealth is old, new, or suspiciously acquired through shipping, sugar, railroads, or colonial investments. The main thing is you never talk about how it was made, ever. The most important rule for a Victorian millionaire is that the source of your fortune must be shrouded in a haze of respectability, plausible deniability, and at least 3 generations of strategic amnesia. Old money claims to have simply always been here. New money insists on quoting the family motto in Latin and pointing to portraits of scowling ancestors, each one painted after the fact to make up for a glaring absence of actual lineage. Either way, when someone asks how your family came into money, you smile vaguely and reference trade in the same tone most people reserve for contagious diseases. The origins of a fortune are always a little murky. Maybe your great-grandfather made his pile in the golden age of shipping, hauling tea, opium, or anything else that could be stacked in a crate and insured against pirates. Or perhaps your ancestor invested in sugar plantations, profiting handsomely, while never quite explaining why there are so many angry letters from Jamaica tucked away in the attic. The more modern millionaires favor railroads, canals, or daring new colonial ventures, which mostly involved sending large sums of money to distant lands and hoping something profitable would eventually return, preferably in the form of gold, spices, or a very exotic pet. Whatever the case, the rules are the same. Never discuss the details, and certainly never mention the words industrial accident, labour dispute, or Act of Parliament. If pressed, simply allude to sound investments, the good judgment of our forebears, or, if you're feeling especially bold, the grace of Providence. Ideally, you should appear so uninterested in money that people begin to suspect you have a private mint hidden in the cellar. The family fortune is not just about cash, it's about property, titles, and a variety of heirlooms so hideous they could only be valuable if someone very important once died in their vicinity. There's always a silver tea service, a collection of ivory-handled walking sticks, and at least one portrait of a distant relation who may or may not have been a pirate. If you're especially unlucky, your inheritance includes a string of decaying tenements, a textile mill in a city you can't pronounce, and a vague but persistent sense of guilt. Money is managed with the seriousness of a military campaign. The head of the family, usually a patriarch with sideburns broad enough to serve as shelf space, meets with the solicitor in the study once a month to discuss investments, debts, and which branch of the family is most likely to disgrace the name this season. The family books are kept under lock and key, and if anyone asks to see them, you respond with horror, followed by a quick change of subject to the weather, or perhaps the finer points of trout fishing. But even the best managed fortunes are never truly safe. Scandals lurk around every corner. An uncle who invested in a failed Peruvian guano mine, a cousin who eloped with the footman, or the tragic tale of the family diamonds that were mysteriously misplaced during a particularly raucous Christmas. Any threat to the family wealth is handled with urgent discretion and, if necessary, a swift trip for the offending party to a quiet villa on the continent. Despite it all, the true secret of the family fortune is that it rarely makes you happy. It brings responsibilities, endless meetings with lawyers, awkward conversations with impoverished relatives, and the unshakable feeling that somewhere, deep in the bowels of the estate, there's a will no one dares open. Still, it's better than being poor. So you glide through life, dressed in inherited lace and weighted with unspoken stories, always ready to toast the family fortune, and always hoping no one ever asks what's actually in the attic. A ball is an opportunity to impress or emotionally scar your guests for life. There's an orchestra, 400 candles, a buffet that could feed a small country, and a high chance someone will faint from excitement or corsetry. The preparations begin months in advance, with the guest list debated as fiercely as a parliamentary bill. Every family rival, eligible bachelor, and minor aristocrat must be included, along with a handful of people you barely know, just in case they're suddenly elevated to Viscount or turn out to own a controlling interest in something useful, like the local gin distillery. The invitations are handwritten on cream-coloured cards, sealed with wax, and hand-delivered by a footman who is still bitter about being made to walk 3 miles to the East Gatehouse. The day of the ball dawns in a haze of panic. Servants are everywhere, polishing, dusting, arranging flowers, and attempting to convince the household ghosts to take the night off. The housekeeper marches about like Napoleon in petticoats, issuing orders about the placement of chairs and the correct angle for the marble bust of Queen Victoria. Someone discovers a last-minute crisis, usually involving the state of the guest lavatory or the realization that the family spaniel has eaten half the centerpiece. As dusk falls, carriages line up along the drive, spilling out a steady stream of guests draped in lace, velvet, and social ambition. The orchestra tunes up, launching into a waltz so lively it could wake the dead, and occasionally does, if Aunt Augusta is to be believed. The ballroom glitters with candles, far too many for the comfort of anyone with a healthy fear of fire or a poorly placed hairpiece. The dance cards are distributed, and suddenly, the true social manoeuvring begins. Daughters flutter, mothers plot, and bachelors glance nervously at the refreshment table. The first dance is a solemn, slightly terrifying affair. Everyone is aware that one wrong step can spell years of whispered ridicule. But by the third quadrille, inhibitions have loosened, and at least 2 uncles are attempting to polka with a vigour that frightens both the orchestra and the family physician. Meanwhile, the buffet groans under the weight of delicacies. Tiny sandwiches that turn to mush, if left unattended, mysterious moulded jellies, and enough blancmange to satisfy even the most desperate pudding enthusiast. There are ices, syllabubs, trifles, and pies. The cheese tray alone requires its own map, and the punch bowl is guarded by a vigilant footman, whose job is to ensure it remains potent but not actually criminal. Scandal is inevitable. There will be at least 1 wardrobe malfunction, 3 mysterious disappearances into the garden, and a dramatic incident involving a dropped glass slipper, or, more likely, a collapsed hairpiece. The local gossip, Mrs. Forsyth, will collect stories like a magpie, storing them for use at next week's tea. Couples are formed, alliances are broken, and by midnight someone is always caught kissing behind a fern, ideally not a blood relative. As the night wears on, so do the dancers. Shoes are discarded beneath chairs, corsets creak under the strain, and at least 1 dowager will faint gracefully onto a convenient chaise longue, to be revived with smelling salts and a fresh glass of sherry. The orchestra powers through until the last waltz, playing with the manic energy of men who know their supper depends on keeping the dance floor full. Cleanup is a separate Herculean challenge. As dawn creeps in, exhausted servants attempt to gather stray gloves, sweep up confetti, and coax snoozing guests into their carriages. Someone will inevitably discover a child asleep beneath the refreshment table and a dog contentedly gnawing on what was once the roast beef. The only trace left of the grandeur is the faint scent of lavender, spilled punch, and the certainty that someone's reputation has been made or spectacularly ruined. Congratulations, you've hosted a Victorian ball. Your guests are impressed, your feet are swollen, and your sandwich recipe is the talk of the county, if only because no one is entirely sure what was in them. Getting anywhere requires a timetable, a footman, 5 trunks, and an iron constitution. You travel in style, but your nerves are in tatters by the time you reach your destination. And don't ask about the bathrooms on Victorian trains unless you want nightmares. Travel for the Victorian millionaire is an exercise in patience, fortitude, and the ability to maintain one's dignity while surrounded by an avalanche of luggage. The mere suggestion of a weekend in Bath or a season in London triggers a household-wide operation on par with a minor military campaign. Your valet consults timetables, the size of wallpaper, the lady's maid issues orders about hat boxes, and a team of porters is summoned to move an alarming assortment of trunks, parasols, and mysterious packages marked essential do not crush. The journey begins long before you leave the house. First comes the planning, mapping your route to avoid bandits, muddy roads, and, most terrifying of all, distant cousins with strong opinions about table settings. Your personal coachman oversees the polishing of the family carriage, which is then loaded with enough blankets and foot warmers to survive a mild ice age. Inside, you're swaddled in lap robes, surrounded by snacks, smelling salts, and a travel tea set elaborate enough to serve a small regiment. The actual carriage ride is an adventure, mostly in bone-rattling discomfort. Even the best springs cannot conquer the potholes, and every hour is punctuated by the chorus of the horses, the creak of leather, and the steady thud of trunks shifting in ways trunks were never meant to shift. You attempt polite conversation as the countryside blurs past villages, hedgerows, and, occasionally, sheep with a deep personal vendetta against carriages. Of course, modernity marches on, and the railway offers a faster alternative. The train station is a chaos of steam, porters, and aristocrats arguing over which class their poodle should ride in. Tickets are acquired, trunks labelled, and you are herded to your compartment, where luxury means velvet cushions and, if you're unlucky, a stranger's elbow in your ribs for the next 3 hours. Train travel itself is an endurance sport. Your options include conversation with strangers who may or may not be minor royalty, staring mournfully out the window at endless cabbage fields, and fending off the advances of a sandwich trolley peddling items, best described as experimental. If you're very unlucky, you'll need to brave the train bathroom, a feat requiring balance, prayer, and a will to live. The less said about the plumbing, the better. Suffice to say, there is a reason Victorians prized self-control. Luggage, meanwhile, has a life of its own. Even the simplest trip requires a team of men to load, unload, and occasionally chase down runaway trunks with wheels as stubborn as any family heirloom. Heaven help you, if your luggage is mislaid. There is nothing quite as humbling as explaining to your hostess that your evening attire is currently on its way to Bristol, accompanied by a pair of boots and the family tortoiseshell hairbrush. Upon arrival, you stagger from the train or carriage, dazed by the noise, soot, and emotional labour of travel. Your host greets you with the enthusiasm of someone about to ask your opinion on wallpaper. A footman whisks away your coat, a maid collects your luggage, and you are left to smile wanly and wonder how soon it's polite to retire to your room and curse Victorian transportation. Despite the ordeal, travel is essential for maintaining your social standing and sanity. After all, how else will you remind your friends that you've been to Bath, seen the new railway, or survived the infamous sandwich incident of 1879? With any luck, the journey home will be only marginally less harrowing, assuming the weather holds, the horses cooperate, and nobody mistakes your luggage for a rival's collection of antique doorstops. Travel in the Victorian age. All the glamour of high society, with all the emotional fragility of a biscuit in a thunderstorm. Feeling ill? Victorian medicine offers a delightful range of treatments: mercury, leeches, or a brisk walk in the smog. Your doctor is equally likely to cure you or write a poem about your symptoms. Let's begin with the house call. If you wake up feeling less than your robust, monocle-polishing self, the first step is to summon the family physician. He arrives, top hat askew and bag bulging with tinctures, powders, and the vague sense of optimism only someone billing by the hour can muster. The consultation is a ceremony of its own. He inquires after your humours, prods you with a thermometer made of lead, and asks, gravely, if you've been feeling melancholic, phlegmatic, or simply full of bile. If you admit to any symptom at all, the treatment menu unrolls like a scroll of bad decisions. The most popular remedy, of course, is laudanum, a delicious concoction of opium and alcohol, prescribed for everything from headaches to heartbreak. If you're lucky, it will make you forget why you called the doctor in the first place. If you're unlucky, you'll soon be seeing more colours than the average Turner painting. Children, by the way, are also given laudanum, because nothing soothes a teething baby like Victorian science. Should you require a more robust cure, the doctor may reach for the mercury, a miraculous toxic substance applied liberally to everything from sore throats to skin blemishes. If you start sweating, hallucinating, or losing your hair, it's working. Combine with a mustard plaster or two for full effect, a home remedy consisting of spicy paste smeared directly onto your chest until you're redder than the family coat of arms. No pain, no gain has never been taken so literally. And then there are leeches. Victorians love leeches. You've got a fever? Leeches. Aching joints? Leeches. Existential ennui? Slap a few leeches on your temples and hope for the best. At some point, you begin to suspect that the local apothecary has shares in the leech industry. If you're squeamish, tough luck, because the leeches are coming for you, your relatives, and even the family dog if he limps for more than an hour. If your condition is more dramatic, a broken leg, say, or the vague but fashionable affliction known as the vapours, the doctor will prescribe bed rest, fresh air, and a diet of beef tea. Beef tea is, disappointingly, not tea at all, but a thin, salty broth whose only benefit is convincing you that actual food might be a bad idea. Meanwhile, you are encouraged to sit in a drafty room, stare out at the rain, and reflect on the folly of ever falling ill. Surgery is an absolute last resort, mostly because anesthesia is in its infancy and antiseptics are considered a bit newfangled. Should you require an operation, you are presented with a wooden stick to bite down on and a small glass of brandy, followed by the encouragement to think happy thoughts, preferably about your will. Surgeons pride themselves on speed, and the less said about cleanliness, the better. If you survive, you're a local legend. If not, at least you've provided your relatives with something to gossip about until next spring. For the hypochondriac, the Victorian era is a buffet of quackery. You can choose from homeopathic sugar pills, electric belts that promise to stimulate the organs, or the ever-popular advice to move to the seaside and drink a pint of salt water every morning. Alternatively, you might be packed in ice, prescribed arsenic, or told to bathe in turpentine for the complexion. Sometimes you suspect the real diagnosis is too much money and not enough distractions. Despite all this, there is a bright side. Should you survive Victorian medicine, you're likely to enjoy a kind of robust, hard-earned health, or at the very least, a legendary resistance to disappointment. And the next time someone suggests a brisk walk in the smog, you can nod knowingly and ask, with or without leeches? Giving to the poor is important, especially if everyone sees you do it. Charity galas, soup kitchens, and carefully choreographed photo opportunities abound. You're less of a philanthropist, more of a competitive donor. For the Victorian millionaire, charity is not just a moral obligation, it's a cornerstone of public relations. To the outside world, your giving spirit is as finely polished as your silver tea service. Philanthropy is a sport with its own rulebook, rankings, and endless opportunities for strategic applause. It's less about lifting the downtrodden and more about being seen lifting the downtrodden while wearing the correct hat and being gently lit by gaslight. The social calendar is packed with fundraisers, each one a marathon of mingling, small talk, and bidding wars over who can donate the most ostentatious sum to the Orphans' Coal Fund. You receive invitations on heavy, embossed cardstock. Lady Wilmot requests the honour of your presence at the annual soup for the deserving gala. Attendance is not optional. Everyone who's anyone is there, peering at you over delicate teacups and mentally calculating how much you gave last year. Your own charitable efforts begin at home, with carefully staged visits to local workhouses and hospitals. You arrive in a carriage, distribute coins to wide-eyed children, and hand out bread with the solemnity of a bishop. There's always a reporter nearby, ready to jot down your wittiest remark and immortalize it in the next day's society pages. Mrs. Bellwether expressed the hope that everyone would try a little harder to be both grateful and clean. Photographs, well, engravings are commissioned, showing you gazing benevolently at the masses while never actually coming into contact with them. The annual charity gala is your chance to shine. The ballroom is festooned with banners, flowers, and a banner-sized rendering of your family crest, just in case anyone forgot whose name is on the donation plaque. The orchestra plays while guests circulate, balancing tiny canapes and enormous opinions about the correct way to serve sherry. There are speeches, auctions, and performances by local orphans who have been rehearsed within an inch of their lives to sing God Save the Queen and not pickpocket the guests. At some point, you must make a grand pledge, enough to impress the room, but not so much that you set an unsustainable precedent for next year. Soup kitchens and holiday drives offer further opportunities for public virtue. You sponsor barrels of coal in winter and baskets of bread at Christmas, with each delivery carefully recorded and reported in the charity's annual newsletter. Volunteers are deployed to distribute gifts while you oversee the proceedings, nodding gravely as you are thanked, photographed, and hustled back into your carriage before you catch a whiff of actual hardship. Of course, not all charitable giving is public. Some is a little more, shall we say, strategic. You might endow a new hospital wing, naming rights included, or fund a school for disadvantaged girls, especially if your own daughters are about to be launched into society and could use the boost in reputation. Rumours swirl about who actually benefits from your largesse, but as long as the right people are impressed, you can sleep easy knowing your legacy is secure. The competition among philanthropists is fierce. Lady Featherstone may have opened a library, but you're opening two, plus a statue and an annual essay contest. Sir Percival is endowing scholarships left and right. You respond with a new children's park, complete with bronze fountains and a conveniently placed marble plaque. At the end of the day, charity in Victorian England is as much about optics as outcomes. You help, but always with an eye toward the guest list, the newspaper column, and the family motto carved over the mantelpiece: do good, but not without a witness. And if you manage to outshine your rivals along the way, so much the better. After all, what's the point of generosity if no one applauds when you do it? The threat of scandal is ever present. One misplaced letter or unauthorized waltz, and you could be cut off by society, forced to spend the rest of your life on the Isle of Wight with only your memories and an angry spaniel. For the Victorian millionaire, reputation is everything. It's more valuable than your fortune, more delicate than your best china, and more likely to be shattered by a single ill-timed sneeze at the wrong dinner party. The social scene is a minefield, and navigating it requires a daily blend of careful planning, subtle eavesdropping, and the sort of paranoia normally reserved for international espionage. It starts with the letters. Every word you write is a potential time bomb. The wrong turn of phrase, the wrong salutation, or simply forgetting to use the correct colour sealing wax can spark rumours that rage through drawing rooms like wildfire. No secret is truly safe. Servants read everything. Neighbours speculate. and the local vicar somehow knows more about your personal life than your own mother. Writing a letter becomes a process involving rough drafts, locked desks, and the fervent hope that your cousin doesn't have sticky fingers or a publishing contract. Then, there's the matter of social engagements. A single misstep at a ball, say, waltzing with someone to whom you are not contractually related, can result in immediate ostracization. The dance cards are as fraught as military battle plans. Accepting the wrong invitation, sitting next to the wrong duchess, or laughing just a bit too loudly at the wrong joke can have social repercussions that last for decades. And heaven help you if your name appears in the society pages alongside someone else's scandal. Your household staff, those silent, ghost-like presences, are the secret keepers and sometimes the secret spreaders. The butler knows more than any detective. The housekeeper can identify footprints in the back garden, and the scullery maid can recount every time you accidentally broke wind at dinner, should she be sufficiently motivated by an extra shilling from a rival family. Keeping your staff loyal is as crucial as keeping your stock portfolio healthy. Either one could unravel your life in the time it takes to butter a crumpet. Family members are another minefield. Siblings with gambling debts, cousins with mysterious continental illnesses, aunts who drink sherry before noon and then proceed to confess their deepest secrets to the grocer. Each represents a threat to your carefully constructed facade. Family reunions are less about shared nostalgia and more about damage control. The official motto of the Victorian upper class might as well be, "Let's not mention that unfortunate incident with the goat, shall we?" Scandal comes in many flavours. The mildest involve a hemline that's a shade too short, or a gentleman seen without gloves. More serious infractions, debts, duels, suspiciously quick engagements, or unsanctioned business ventures, such as that time Uncle Theodore tried to corner the market on imported parrots. The most dangerous are the whispered allegations, affairs, illegitimate children, fortunes lost at the gaming tables, each one capable of toppling a family faster than a stock market crash. To avoid catastrophe, you must master the arts of denial, distraction, and selective amnesia. If caught in a compromising position, feign ignorance. "I thought she was my second cousin, twice removed." Or deflect with the time-honoured tactic of blaming the French. If rumours persist, retreat to the countryside and wait them out, ideally with a good book and a reliable alibi. Under no circumstances should you ever confess, unless you can do so in a best-selling memoir decades later. Even if you do everything right, scandals have a way of finding you. Sometimes it's a jealous rival, a bored journalist, or just plain bad luck. But the real trick is survival. Maintain your composure, keep your secrets well buried, and always have an escape plan to the Isle of Wight. Spaniel optional. If all else fails, remember that time heals all wounds, except, perhaps, that business with the goat. No one ever forgets the goat. In Victorian society, the only thing more terrifying than poverty is public embarrassment. Protect your reputation at all costs, and if you can't, at least make sure the scandal is interesting enough to be worth remembering. Marriage is less about romance and more about contracts, alliances, and property. Your spouse may be charming, terrifying, or mostly absent. Just don't expect to marry for love unless you enjoy being poor. For the Victorian millionaire, matrimony is first and foremost a business deal conducted with the subtlety of a stock exchange and the emotional warmth of a bank loan. From the moment you make your debut, or more likely, your mother makes your debut for you, your romantic future is a matter of family strategy, social maneuvering, and occasional outright panic. The matchmaking begins early, orchestrated by a network of mothers, aunts, and well-meaning acquaintances with keen eyes for both family crests and inheritance prospects. Suitors are evaluated like rare artworks. Prospective spouses are examined for family connections, acreage, and the all-important question of whether they can bring a tolerable dowry or at least a castle with fewer than 3 visible leaks. If you are the heir, the pressure is immense. Everyone expects you to secure the family's future, preferably by marrying into a title, a fortune, or, if luck runs out, a distant cousin whose only real asset is an interesting collection of porcelain goats. Courtship rituals are a public spectacle. Every glance across a crowded ballroom, every stroll through the rose garden, and every slightly awkward conversation over tepid lemonade is closely observed by a battalion of chaperones. If you so much as brush sleeves with the wrong person, half the county will be talking about it by breakfast. Letters must be approved, dances scheduled, and reputations preserved at all costs. For every successful union, there's a pile of broken engagements, mismatched expectations, and at least one fainting episode at the hands of a particularly ruthless mother-in-law. When negotiations finally yield results, the marriage contract is drawn up with the precision of a military treaty. Property is exchanged, settlements are calculated, and the family solicitor smiles with satisfaction as he adds another line to his bill. The wedding itself is both an endurance test and a social performance, attended by every distant relative, family friend, and opportunist, eager to see who cries first, the bride, the groom, or the local vicar. Gifts pile up in the drawing room, most of them either impractical, hideous, or both. There will be speeches, awkward toasts, and a dramatic cake so dense it threatens the structural integrity of the reception hall. As for married life? Well, it depends. Some unions blossom into genuine affection. If both parties are lucky, patient, or simply too polite to complain. Others settle into cordial partnership, maintained by separate wings of the house and a mutual love of traveling alone. If your spouse is charming, you count yourself blessed. If terrifying, you stay on their good side. If mostly absent, well, you can always fill the void with hobbies, philanthropy, or a series of slightly eccentric pets. Children arrive, either promptly or eventually, and the real negotiations begin. Names are chosen with care, godparents selected for strategic advantage, and the question of education debated with the same intensity as last year's stock market crash. Every child is a potential alliance. Every marriage, a chance to strengthen the family's grip on fortune, property, or at the very least, the local cricket team. For those truly rebellious souls who insist on marrying for love, the consequences are dire. A sharp drop in social standing, disapproving glances at every gathering, and the permanent exile of Sunday lunch invitations from half the family. Romance is a luxury, indulged only by poets, the hopelessly naive, and people with nothing left to lose. Everyone else accepts that marriage is a lifelong negotiation, one that is renegotiated over every breakfast, family gathering, and the occasional accidental inheritance windfall. So you move forward, arm in arm, or, at a discreet distance, secure in the knowledge that your union is, above all, an investment. Love may be optional, but a solid portfolio is forever. In Victorian England, a successful marriage isn't about passion, it's about surviving the ballrooms, outlasting the gossip, and remembering to smile at the right people during the family portrait. When not attending to business, you're hunting, shooting, playing croquet, or pretending to enjoy rowing on the Thames. Exercise is performed only under strict supervision and in highly decorative clothing. As a Victorian millionaire, you're expected to embrace leisure with the same seriousness that lesser mortals devote to actual work. The art of appearing active while achieving very little is an accomplishment in itself, a delicate dance of etiquette, pageantry, and, whenever possible, sitting down. For every hour spent managing your investments or feigning interest in the latest news from Parliament, you're rewarded with a dizzying array of outdoor pursuits, all of which come with elaborate rules and specialised wardrobes. Let's start with country sports. The hunting party is the centrepiece of the social calendar. Even for those who secretly wish the game would just surrender and appear on a silver platter, you rise at dawn, fortified by a large breakfast and a stronger sense of peer pressure, to don tweeds, riding boots, and a hat that's been in the family for at least 3 generations. The men take to the field, guns slung over their arms and an entourage of dogs, beaters, and nervous undergardeners trailing behind. Ladies, meanwhile, might follow at a safe distance, demonstrating just enough enthusiasm to appear hearty, without actually risking any mud on their shoes. At the end of the day, the bag is counted, the stories are embellished, and everyone repairs indoors for a restorative glass of sherry and a gentle critique of Lord Smedley's shooting stance. On quieter days, you might engage in a genteel game of croquet on the lawn, a sport with far more rules and far more arguments than anyone outside of Victorian England would ever believe possible. Croquet is the true test of social grace and passive aggression. The ability to send a rival's ball spinning into the shrubbery with a single innocent tap is celebrated in polite society as the height of wit and skill. Croquet parties are also a prime opportunity for displaying one's summer wardrobe, which features enough lace, ribbons, and impractical hats to keep the local milliner in business for years. If the weather is uncooperative, which, let's be honest, it usually is, attention turns to indoor pursuits. Billiards, whist, and chess provide hours of sedentary competition. While more ambitious souls may attempt the occasional bout of fencing or archery, under the watchful eye of an instructor who is paid to both praise and discreetly intervene, should anyone look likely to pull a muscle. For ladies, embroidery, painting, and supervised piano recitals offer a semblance of activity without any risk of unseemly perspiration. Rowing on the Thames is considered both invigorating and terribly fashionable, provided you do not actually row. The preferred approach is to recline gracefully in the stern, while someone with strong arms and fewer social prospects does the work. You nod appreciatively, wave to passing acquaintances, and hope your hat doesn't end up in the river, as happened to Lady Featherstone last season. Afterwards, you return home, flushed with the healthy glow of exercise, which will be promptly cured by a nap and several slices of seed cake. No account of Victorian leisure would be complete without mention of the spa. Every few months, the entire household decamps to Bath or another fashionable resort to take the waters. This involves bathing in tepid, slightly sulphurous pools, listening to earnest lectures on the curative powers of mineral springs, and, most importantly, being seen by the right people in the right pavilion at the right hour. True relaxation is elusive, but the appearance of health is everything. In short, leisure in Victorian England is an elaborate, highly choreographed display of wealth, social standing, and decorative outerwear. You will emerge from every activity with your reputation intact, your clothing immaculate, and your actual physical effort kept to an absolute minimum. If you're lucky, the only thing you'll pull is a muscle from laughing at someone else's attempt to vault a hedge. Congratulations! You have mastered the art of Victorian relaxation, proof that with enough money, even hard work can be outsourced. Reputation is everything. You commission portraits, host interviews, and sometimes bribe the local newspaper to forget your unfortunate habit of falling asleep during Parliament. For the Victorian millionaire, personal branding is not a modern invention. It's an ancient art, practiced with oils, marble, and the judicious application of flattery. Your image must be curated, cultivated, and, if necessary, rescued from disaster with a combination of quick thinking and cold hard cash. No moment is too small, no detail too trivial. If someone might see it, hear it, or, heaven forbid, write about it, you'd better make sure it's nothing short of spectacular. Portraits are the cornerstone of your image campaign. No drawing room is complete without a stern ancestor glaring down from above the fireplace, or a recent oil painting of yourself looking suitably heroic, pensive, or just slightly better looking than in real life. Portrait sittings are their own ordeal, hours of holding a noble pose while the family artist mumbles about capturing your inner light. The goal is to look wealthy but not too smug, serious but not unhinged, and just mysterious enough to be interesting. Bonus points if you can include a symbolic object. A globe, a book, or the family dog staring soulfully into the middle distance. If you're particularly ambitious, you'll commission a family group portrait, a logistical nightmare featuring 20 relatives, 2 uncooperative toddlers, and a dog who refuses to sit still. These are occasions for matching outfits, fixed smiles, and the sort of repressed tension that keeps Victorian portrait painters in business for decades. The finished result is always a little bit unsettling, but as long as everyone looks respectable, no one complains. But static images are only the beginning. The rise of photography and the illustrated press means that your public persona can now be broadcast far beyond your own marble hallways. Every appearance at a ball, charity gala, or railway opening is an opportunity and a risk. You must dress for the occasion, practice your thoughtful benefactor expression, and strategically position yourself next to people whose reputation you'd like to borrow. If the press catches you in a flattering light, you've won the day. If not, it's time for some very polite letters to the editor, and maybe a discreet donation to the photographer's favorite charity. Rumors, naturally, are a constant threat. That little slip at last year's Christmas party, the unfortunate misunderstanding at the regatta, best dealt with swiftly and decisively. You employ a small army of secretaries and spin doctors whose job is to reframe every incident as an amusing anecdote or a touching example of your humility. If that fails, a hastily arranged family holiday to Switzerland usually does the trick. Nothing says innocent bystander like a sudden enthusiasm for yodeling. And then there's the power of storytelling. Every great family needs a legend or two, a noble ancestor who fought at Waterloo, a distant relation who once advised the Queen, or the time great-aunt Mildred single-handedly saved the vicar from a runaway goose. These stories are told and retold at every dinner party, growing more heroic with each retelling until you begin to suspect even the dog is starting to doubt them. Still, the best legends always start with a kernel of truth and end with a gentle reminder that your family is, if nothing else, endlessly interesting. Managing your image isn't just about vanity, it's a matter of social survival. In a world where gossip spreads faster than telegrams and reputations are built and broken over the course of a single season, a carefully cultivated persona is your best insurance policy. You know when to look dignified, when to be photographed handing out soup, and when to quietly disappear just before the scandal breaks. So you persevere, commissioning portraits, curating legends, and mastering the delicate art of being exactly as fabulous as everyone suspects. If anyone asks about your eccentricities, simply smile, quote your family motto, virtue, valor, and vague deniability, and remind them that history, after all, is written by the well-portrayed. Gas lamps, bell pulls, primitive telephones, your house is stuffed with labor-saving devices that require 3 servants each to operate, and you're forbidden from touching any of them. Welcome to the cutting edge of Victorian technology, where every modern convenience is equal parts marvel and hazard. As a wealthy homeowner, you're expected to equip your residence with the latest gadgets, not because you'll ever actually use them, but because your neighbors will gossip if you don't. The end result is a home that looks like a showroom for experimental engineering, run by people who fear change more than sudden economic collapse. Let's start with the gas lamps, those shining symbols of progress and anxiety. Instead of candles, you now have gleaming glass globes mounted on every wall, powered by invisible pipes that snake through the house like a family of very ambitious eels. Lighting them is a 2-person job, one footman to turn the tap, another to wield a dangerously long match, and everyone else to stand by with a wet blanket just in case. The possibility of a sudden, room-filling explosion is all part of the ambience. When it works, the glow is magical. When it doesn't, you hope your will is up to date. Next, behold the bell pull, an elaborate system of ropes and wires that allows you to summon assistance from any room at any hour, whether you need a glass of water, an extra pillow, or just want to demonstrate your mastery of pointless luxury. Each pull is carefully labelled and leads to a vast board in the servants' quarters, where a little tag drops with a delicate ting. To you, it's a miracle. To your staff, it's a game of constant hide and seek, complete with the daily risk of responding to the wrong bell and being sent on a wild goose chase to the linen closet. The household telephone if you're progressive enough to own one, is both a status symbol and a source of existential dread. Only the boldest family members dare speak into it, while everyone else regards it as something that might, at any moment, connect them directly to the devil, or, worse, the in-laws. Calls must be announced by a butler with the solemnity of a royal audience, and every conversation is a blend of static, shouting, and the faint sense that privacy is a thing of the past. God help you if it rings during dinner, as the ensuing confusion may require a full reset of the seating plan. Your kitchen, meanwhile, is home to an array of newfangled contraptions, each more confusing than the last. The labor-saving range promises faster cooking, provided you have a trained engineer and a fire extinguisher on hand. The icebox is filled by a man who arrives twice a week with blocks of frozen mystery, muttering darkly about the future of refrigeration. Even the mechanical bread slicer requires a level of mechanical sympathy that eludes everyone except the scullery maid, who secretly prefers a knife. Other gadgets pepper your mansion: speaking tubes that allow you to shout orders through the walls, complicated water closets that flush with more noise than a railway station, and the infamous dumbwaiter, a miniature elevator for food and gossip alike. These devices are intended to save time, but mostly create new categories of household panic. At least twice a month, someone gets stuck in a pantry, locked in a bathroom, or startled by the sudden, ghostly appearance of lunch rising through the floorboards. Your role in all of this? Mostly to marvel at the ingenuity, praise the inventors, and never, ever attempt to operate anything yourself. The last time you touched the bell pull, you accidentally summoned the entire staff to your bedroom at 2 a.m. and found yourself apologizing to the cook for 3 days. Victorian technology, dazzling, dangerous, and absolutely not your problem. And really, isn't that what being a millionaire is all about? Being rich in Victorian England means being confronted daily by the visible misery of others. You hand out coins, bake symbolic loaves, and try not to think about it while eating roast beef. The poor are everywhere, forming the silent backdrop to your world of monogrammed linen and imported carpets. They sweep the streets, scrub your front steps, and stare hungrily at the bakery window while you pass by in a carriage, debating the relative merits of afternoon tea versus light supper. You're well aware that your fortune rests, at least in part, on their invisible labour and the world's most ambitious coal mines. Yet, social etiquette demands a performance of benevolence, a delicate, guilt-tinged ballet that takes place between breakfast and luncheon. Charity is as much about optics as it is about actual help. Every self-respecting Victorian millionaire participates in the seasonal distribution of bread, soup, or coals, especially when the press is watching. The charitable giving must be both generous and public, coins handed to beggars while a footman happens to witness the event, or a grand gesture of sending a basket of stale cakes to the local orphanage, with your name spelled out in icing, of course. The local newspaper will dutifully record your generosity, omitting the fact that most recipients haven't seen a fresh bun since the last Jubilee. Churches and charities organise annual drives, and your attendance is required by both your conscience and your social calendar. You stand beside a table laden with penny loaves and watery soup, bestowing your most compassionate smile on those in attendance. The vicar nods approvingly, children shuffle forward to receive hand-me-down shoes, and everyone tries very hard not to mention the recent rumour about your new silk curtains costing more than the local school's yearly budget. For the truly ambitious, there are committees to join. The Ladies' Benevolent Society, the Coal and Blanket Fund, the Home for Fallen Women, each provides ample opportunity to feel useful while also providing material for your next dinner party anecdote. The meetings are largely spent debating which families are most deserving of assistance and ensuring that any help is accompanied by a stern lecture on the virtues of thrift, cleanliness, and silent gratitude. The goal is to alleviate suffering, but only in a manner that reinforces the existing social order. Sometimes, the act of giving is a grand affair. Christmas brings the legendary charity ball, where tickets cost a week's wages, and the proceeds are divided between several worthy causes. minus the cost of the orchestra and the champagne. You dance, donate, and try not to notice the thin, polite smiles of those serving the canapés. As you waltz beneath the glittering chandeliers, you comfort yourself with the knowledge that, if nothing else, your charitable work will earn you a glowing write-up in the society columns. Of course, guilt is a stubborn guest at the Victorian millionaires' table. You can't help but notice the stark divide between your world and theirs. The taste of roast beef at dinner sometimes fades when you remember the families huddled in drafty tenements or the barefoot children hawking matches in the rain. Yet, you reassure yourself that your annual donations and occasional visit to the workhouse are more than enough. After all, personal poverty would help no one, and you do provide employment, even if it involves a great deal of shoe polishing and standing very still. Still, there are moments when the illusion wavers. A ragged child's cough, a labourer's haunted stare, or the unexpected question from your own offspring, "Why are they hungry, Mama?" reminds you that all the symbolic cakes in England won't close the chasm between your worlds. In these instances, you redouble your efforts, bake a few more loaves, and, if necessary, write a cheque large enough to restore your peace of mind and your place in polite society. So you continue, handing out coins, slicing guilt-laced cake, and praying that someday someone will invent a way to feel generous without the inconvenient side effect of thinking too much. Until then, at least you'll always have fresh buns and a good story for the next charity gala. With running water still a novelty and deodorant not yet invented, cleanliness is a performance. You're more likely to be powdered, perfumed, and prayed for than properly scrubbed. Victorian millionaires are masters of the art of looking clean, even if the reality is a little less sparkling. Bathing is still a minor engineering feat, and the average bathroom boasts more marble than plumbing. A full bath is a rare and momentous event, usually announced in advance, so the entire staff can prepare, from heating the water to fluffing the towels and alerting the fire brigade just in case. You don't so much bathe as stage a minor opera, complete with a chorus of worried maids and a supporting cast of bath oils and scented soaps. More often, you settle for a sponge bath, which involves a basin of tepid water, a sturdy flannel, and the vague hope that your ancestors aren't watching. This daily ritual takes place behind a folding screen while your valet or lady's maid offers running commentary on the state of your hair, nails, and moral character. If you're especially fastidious, you might request a second basin, one for upper parts and one for lower, to maintain standards of Victorian decency even in the midst of personal despair. Soap comes in bars so perfumed they could clear a sick room, each one bearing your initials, or at least the initials of the person you borrowed it from. The scent of lavender, rose, or violets fills the air, competing valiantly with the ever-present aroma of coal smoke, horse manure, and existential anxiety. Shampoo is a luxury, often replaced by a sprinkle of powder or the enthusiastic use of a hairbrush with bristles so stiff they could double as a hedgehog. Deodorant, alas, is still a glimmer in some future scientist's eye. In the meantime, you rely on perfume, eau de cologne, or, if truly desperate, a small sachet of herbs tucked discreetly into your bodice or waistcoat. Gentlemen favour musk or sandalwood, while ladies dab rose water behind their ears and hope for a stiff breeze. On particularly warm days, everyone simply prays for rain and a forgiving social circle. Teeth brushing is another adventure. Toothpaste exists, but usually arrives as a gritty powder made of chalk, charcoal, and optimism. The brush itself is a marvel of Victorian engineering, often crafted from bone and bristles that seem to have been harvested from a particularly stubborn pig. If you wish for minty freshness, you'll have to settle for a swig of strong spirits or a quick gargle with vinegar. Fresh breath is more wishful thinking than reality. Hair care is both a science and an ordeal. Men plaster their hair with pomade, wax, or even bear grease, resulting in styles that can withstand gale force winds and light artillery. Ladies curl, crimp, and braid with military precision, sometimes sleeping with their hair wound around rags to achieve just the right bounce. Wigs and hairpieces are popular for both sexes, offering instant elegance and a reliable hiding place for small valuables or, on bad days, head lice. For special occasions, powder and rouge are applied with the enthusiasm of a muralist restoring a cathedral. Pallor is prized, tan skin suggests manual labor, and that simply won't do, so you dust your face until you resemble a haunted pastry. A quick brush of carmine to the cheeks and a dab of lampblack to the lashes, and you're ready for your close-up, or at least ready to face the family portraitist without sending him running. Despite all the effort, panic is always just around the corner. A sudden rainstorm, a stray dog, or an unexpected visit from the bishop can undo hours of careful preening. At such moments, you rely on strategic fans, hastily donned gloves, and the time-honoured excuse, it must be the weather. After all, in Victorian England, looking clean is almost as good as being clean, and considerably less work. Congratulations! You have mastered the subtle dance of Victorian hygiene. Powdered, perfumed, and perhaps a little bit panicked, you are ready to face another day and another round of compliments on your impeccable, if mostly imaginary, cleanliness. As darkness falls, your mansion comes alive with candlelight, mysterious creaks, and an army of night servants. Sleep doesn't come easy, especially with the fear of burglars, ghosts, or accidentally marrying an American. Nighttime in a Victorian millionaire's home is a theatrical production, complete with stage lighting, in the form of flickering gas lamps and enough candles to bankrupt a small principality, a supporting cast of servants, and a script that leans heavily toward melodrama. The day's bustle slowly fades, replaced by the solemn rituals of locking up the house, counting the silver, and nervously inspecting every shadow for evidence of supernatural activity or, worse, the second footman sneaking a midnight snack. Before you can even contemplate bed, you must survive the round. This is when the butler and footman move systematically through the house, securing windows, bolting doors, and testing locks with the intensity of a prison warden on inspection day. Victorian homes are famously insecure. Thin glass, rattling sashes, and doors that groan in protest every time they're fastened. For peace of mind, you've installed enough locks, bars, and chains to make a medieval fortress jealous. Every latch is checked, double-checked, and then checked again for good measure. Burglars, you're told, are everywhere. Ghosts, according to the housekeeper, are even worse. Once the house is secure, the evening entertainment begins. You retire to the drawing room, where shadows from the fire dance along the wallpaper, and relatives gather for ghost stories, cautionary tales, and the latest gossip about Lord Wetherby's scandalous elopement with the opera singer. The children listen, wide-eyed, to tales of phantom carriages, banshees on the moors, and haunted portraits that watch you as you walk. After a few too many stories, someone always claims to hear footsteps in the attic or the sound of distant, sorrowful moaning, usually the wind, or the housekeeper discovering a moth hole in the drapes. Eventually, yawns begin to outnumber nervous giggles. The upstairs landing transforms into a procession of candlelit figures, each balancing a candlestick, a copy of Dickens, and the certainty that the next corner will reveal either a ghost or a cousin on the hunt for biscuits. Every corridor is an obstacle course. Threadbare carpets, mysterious cold drafts, and the ever-present danger of stepping on a cat that has decided the middle of the hallway is the ideal place for existential reflection. Your own bedroom awaits, a fortress of heavy curtains, embroidered pillows, and enough bedding to survive a Siberian winter. The air is scented with lavender and the faint whiff of fear. Night clothes are donned, slippers exchanged for heavier, more practical models in case of nocturnal emergencies, such as an unscheduled visit from the dowager aunt or the discovery of a bat in the washstand. Before you slip between the sheets, a final parade of night servants passes through, the maid to stoke the fire, the under-butler to check the locks again, and, if you're lucky, the cook with a tray of cold pie and a judgmental look. Your last act is to blow out the candles, one by one, careful not to inhale too much wax or set your nightcap ablaze, and listen to the silence settle, punctuated only by the ticking of a dozen clocks and the occasional, distant bark from a neighbour's overexcited spaniel. Sleep, of course, is a complicated affair. You lie awake, listening for signs of life, afterlife, or just the reassuring tread of a night servant doing their rounds. If you do manage to drift off, your dreams are filled with locked doors, lost keys, and the vague but persistent anxiety that somewhere in the house, an American cousin is planning a surprise visit. But at last, night holds you, along with all your hopes, fears, and exactly 40 locks on every door. Congratulations! You have survived the Victorian night, phantoms, burglars, and family dramas included. Sweet dreams, and may the only thing that disturbs your slumber be the faint but comforting chime of the grandfather clock in the hall. Communication is an Olympic event. Instead of texting, you write lengthy letters on monogrammed stationery using a quill that's been sharpened more often than your social instincts. Every note is a dance of etiquette, from elaborate greetings to stealth insults. And the post arrives days later, just in time to start a new misunderstanding. In Victorian England, letter writing isn't just a means of passing along information. It's a test of intelligence, social grace, and endurance. You rise in the morning to find your writing desk already prepared by a dutiful maid. Fresh ink, blotting paper, an army of quills, and an intimidating stack of correspondence requiring your immediate attention. You sigh, stretch your fingers, and mentally prepare for a marathon of polite warfare. The first step is selecting the right stationery. Heavy, cream-coloured paper embossed with your initials is non-negotiable. Anything less signals either bankruptcy or moral weakness. The paper must be crisp, the edges sharp, and the envelope lined with tissue so luxurious it could double as a ball gown. Your ink, naturally, is imported, preferably from Paris, and comes with a warning label about staining carpets, fingers, and reputations. You dip your quill, draw a deep breath, and begin. Opening lines are a ballet of humility and coded assertion. My dearest Lady Featherstone, if you're in a generous mood. Esteemed Sir, if you're keeping your options open. Or simply Sir, if you're prepared for open hostilities. Your handwriting is a performance in itself. Elegant loops, decisive strokes, and the odd flamboyant flourish designed to show both refinement and the ability to survive a 3-hour sermon on the virtues of penmanship. But content is king. Every letter must strike a delicate balance, warm but not over, familiar, witty but never crude, and, if you're lucky, so cryptic that future historians will spend decades arguing about whether you were proposing marriage or inviting someone to a picnic. The true art is in the subtext. Are you inviting your cousin for tea, or subtly reminding her of that unfortunate incident with the blancmange at last year's ball? Is your warmest regards an olive branch or a velvet-gloved slap? Every sentence is a trap, every compliment a test, every apology a chance to win or lose territory in the ongoing social chess match. Then there's the matter of postage. You can't just hand your letter to the butler and hope for the best. No. You must select the correct stamp, ensure the address is written in a hand both legible and impressive, and pray the postboy isn't in one of his moods. The local post office is a hub of intrigue, with every letter eyed suspiciously, weighed on ornate scales, and dispatched with the solemnity of an international treaty. Waiting for a reply is an exercise in patience and anxiety. Days pass. The air thickens with anticipation and the possibility of disaster. Finally, the post arrives, a stack of envelopes bearing the scars of travel, smudges, creases, and the faint smell of a stranger's perfume. You tear them open with trembling fingers, scanning for hidden insults, coded invitations, or, on bad days, a bill. Inevitably, misunderstandings arise. You reply to your aunt's inquiry about your health with an unfortunate joke about consumption, and suddenly half the county is convinced you're on your deathbed. A misinterpreted "sincerely yours" can end a friendship, while an overly effusive ever your devoted might trigger a duel or an unwanted marriage proposal. By the time the dust settles, you have a new round of correspondence to address, a reputation to mend, and another 5 sheets of cream-coloured paper to monogram. Despite the hazards, there is a certain pleasure in the ritual. The careful choosing of words, the sense of connection, and the knowledge that your best zinger may take days to land but will be remembered for years. In the end, letter writing is the Victorian answer to social media. Painstakingly curated, endlessly analysed, and always open to interpretation. Your mansion may look invincible, but it's basically a tinderbox with plumbing. Fires break out if you look at a candle the wrong way. Rain seeps in through the drawing room ceiling, and every so often, a newfangled boiler erupts, turning bath time into a surprise steampunk reenactment. Property insurance? Dream on. Every Victorian millionaire secretly lives in terror of their own home. Beneath the surface glamour, polished banisters, crystal chandeliers, the reassuring glint of silver lurks a world of hazards, each more eager than the last to humble your social ambitions and reduce your life's work to a cautionary tale. It starts, inevitably, with fire. Fire is the ever-present, quietly smouldering enemy. There are candles in every room, open hearths in every hall, and gas lamps installed by men who believed safety was just a suggestion. The servants are drilled in fire protocol, meaning they're prepared to form a disorganized bucket brigade at the slightest whiff of smoke. You yourself eye every candelabra with suspicion, knowing that a gust of wind, an overzealous cat, or an absent-minded aunt could spark a blaze that would make the London Fire Brigade weep. Even with the vigilance of an entire household, disaster strikes. Curtains burst into flames during a particularly dramatic round of charades. A guest drops a cigar onto the rug, and suddenly everyone is helpfully offering advice while you frantically search for a bucket that doesn't contain last week's jelly. When it's over, you're left with a scorched patch of carpet, a story that will follow you to your grave, and the realization that your ancestors survived all this only by luck and the timely intervention of the housekeeper's dog. Water, for its part, is less dramatic but equally destructive. The roof leaks, the basement floods, and the pipes, those modern marvels, groan, rattle, and occasionally erupt. A sudden downpour sends rainwater cascading through the conservatory, filling your prized fern display with enough mud to pot an entire street's worth of geraniums. Bath time is a high-risk event. Water boils, pipes burst, and at least once a season the boiler launches a cloud of steam so thick that half the household takes it as a sign to update their wills. Plumbing is handled by a mysterious breed of tradesman who appears only in emergencies and leaves behind an invoice and a vague scent of despair. Electrical appliances, if you're foolish enough to have them, are a ticking time bomb. Early vacuum cleaners make more noise than progress. Electric bells summon servants who arrive carrying fire extinguishers just in case, and a single crossed wire can plunge your entire home into darkness or sudden, alarming illumination. The phrase "it sparked joy" takes on an entirely different meaning. And then there are the infestations. Mice nibble at your wainscoting, moths launch campaigns against your best drapes, and the family cat, who is technically employed to handle both, prefers to nap in the linen closet and ignore the problem entirely. Bedbugs, cockroaches, and the occasional snake in the cellar keep things lively. You deploy traps, powders, and, if truly desperate, a professional exterminator who swears the secret is to simply burn the house down and start again. But the real adventure is in the response. The household bands together, improvising with buckets, mops, and the time-honoured art of blaming the youngest footman. The butler declares it character building, the housekeeper insists it was much worse last winter, and the cook threatens to resign unless the kitchen ceiling is mended by Sunday. In the end, you learn to live with a certain amount of chaos. Your mansion may be a monument to taste and prosperity, but it's also a monument to Victorian optimism, built with bravado, inhabited with courage, and held together by spit, polish, and just a hint of existential dread. Property insurance? You're lucky if you can ensure your sanity. Congratulations, you've survived another day in a Victorian house. If you're reading this by candlelight, just keep an eye on the curtains, and remember, when the boiler explodes, duck and cover. Being wealthy isn't enough. You must know the precise angle at which to bow, the proper distance to stand from a duchess, and exactly how many asparagus spears you can eat before being declared a social pariah. Lessons begin at birth and never end, which explains why you're terrified of forks and haunted by the ghost of Miss Prudence, your childhood governess. Victorian etiquette isn't just a series of suggestions, it's an ironclad code, more complex than any modern tax law and enforced by an army of governesses, tutors, and steely-eyed aunts. From your earliest days, your life is structured around the rituals of good manners. Before you can speak, you're taught to curtsy, nod, and suppress all natural urges to giggle, yawn, or breathe too enthusiastically in public. By age 5, you can recite the proper greetings for every possible social encounter. How do you do? Is reserved for equals, while your grace is strictly for duchesses and, apparently, anyone with the ability to purchase half of Sussex. Woe betide the child who mistakes a marquess for a viscount. The shame will haunt the family through at least 3 generations. At the dinner table, every fork, knife, and spoon is a potential landmine. Start from the outside and work in, intones Miss Prudence, hovering like a crow at your elbow. And for heaven's sake, do not spear your food. The etiquette school curriculum includes the classics, the art of sitting still, the science of small talk, and the history of napkin folding. Dancing lessons are mandatory, because there's nothing more humiliating than tripping over your own feet in front of a duke. You practice the quadrille until your toes ache and your enthusiasm vanishes, learning that smiling is acceptable, but laughter is not, unless the Countess of Wexford laughs first, in which case you may allow a brief, decorous chuckle. There are lessons in deportment, involving hours of balancing books on your head while navigating treacherous corridors filled with strategically placed ottomans. Your posture must be both regal and inviting, but never so relaxed that you could be mistaken for someone in trade. Boys are taught to bow just so, no more than 15 degrees, lest you appear subservient, and girls to curtsy deeply, holding their skirts in precisely the right way, lest you accidentally flash an ankle and trigger a minor scandal. Conversation is an Olympic event. You're drilled in the art of polite indifference, showing interest in others' tales of gout and gardening, while never revealing a single interesting thought of your own. Speak when spoken to, says Miss Prudence, and never ever mention politics, money, or the real reason why Aunt Mildred stopped being invited to Christmas. Topics like the weather, the Queen's latest portrait, and the relative merits of French versus English marmalade are always safe, unless, of course, someone in the room is secretly French, in which case you must pivot to floriculture with the agility of a circus acrobat. As for table manners, the rules are arcane. Asparagus is to be eaten with the fingers, but only if served cold and only at luncheons in months without an R. Soup must be sipped silently from the side of the spoon, and if you spill anything, the correct response is to faint and hope for a discreet removal by servants. The list of forbidden behaviours is endless. No elbows on the table, no reaching, no licking knives, and absolutely no burping, no matter how triumphant the meal. Graduation from etiquette school doesn't mean you're free. It simply means the tests become more subtle and the stakes higher. Every social gathering is a minefield, every new acquaintance a potential judge. You learn to listen for the sharp intake of breath that signals a faux pas, to dread the raised eyebrow of the matriarch, and to fear the gently whispered, "Did you see what she did with the fish knife?" In the end, etiquette is less about genuine grace and more about survival. You cling to your training like a life preserver, hoping that, if nothing else, you'll avoid disgrace, exile, or the most dreaded fate of all, becoming a cautionary tale told by Miss Prudence to the next generation of trembling children. Congratulations. You are officially well-mannered and possibly traumatized for life. And so, as the last gaslights flicker and the servants finally go off to polish silver in their dreams, we leave behind the velvet-cushioned, steam-powered, faintly ridiculous world of the Victorian millionaire. Tonight, you've survived a day of agonizing fashion decisions, navigated conversations stiffer than your starched collar, and endured the existential dread of accidentally using the wrong dessert fork in front of the Duke of Worcestershire. You've dined on questionable aspic, lost track of at least one child in your East Wing, and tried to relax in a bathtub that weighs as much as your regrets. You've faced house fires, exploding boilers, and the terrifying spectre of etiquette school, where the only thing sharper than the quills are the social consequences. Yet, you persisted, stoically sipping your third cup of weak tea, offering polite nods to people whose names you'll never remember, and clinging to your dignity through every minor scandal and overcooked mutton chop. So as you settle into your own, hopefully smaller and less haunted, bed tonight, take a quiet moment to be grateful for the little things, like hot showers that don't require a servant, pajamas with a reasonable button count, and the blissful absence of any obligation to host a ball for 400 slightly judgmental guests. Maybe even whisper a thank you to the ancestors who survived social ruin so you could enjoy central heating and Wi-Fi. Because history might be absurd, inconvenient, and covered in 3 layers of crepe, but it's also a reminder that people, whether rich or poor, powdered or just plain exhausted, are endlessly inventive, stubbornly hopeful, and always a little bit ridiculous. Good night, and may your dreams be as comfortable as a feather bed in a room with only one butler. Sleep well.